Welcome to the Timeless Talents channel. In today's video, I'll be featuring some of the most enchanting Hollywood couples and exploring their age differences. Enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Katharine McPhee, 41 years old, and David Foster, 75 years old. Leah Michelle, 38 years old, and Zandy Reich, 42 years old. Livia Gigoioli, 55 years old, and Colin Firth, 64 years old. Megan Fox, 39 years old, and Machine Gun Kelly, 35 years old. Lana Del Rey, 40 years old, and Sean Larkin, 51 years old. Carrie Underwood, 42 years old, and Mike Fisher, 45 years old. Cameron Diaz, 52 years old, and Benji Madden, 46 years old. Brittany Ferlin, 38 years old, and Tommy Lee, 62 years old. Paletta Washington, 74 years old, and Denzel Washington, 70 years old. Caitlin McHugh, 39 years old, and John Stamos, 61 years old. Lily Allen, 40 years old, and David Harbour, 50 years old. Luciana Barroso, 48 years old, and Matt Damon, 54 years old. Kendall Jenner, 29 years old, and Devin Booker, 28 years old. Penelope Cruz, 51 years old, and Javier Bardem, 56 years old. Anne Hathaway, 42 years old, and Adam Schulman, 44 years old. Sarah Jessica Parker, 60 years old, and Matthew Broderick, 63 years old. Nicole Kidman, 58 years old, and Keith Urban, 57 years old. Bahati Prinsloo, 37 years old, and Adam Levine, 46 years old. Sophie Hunter, 47 years old, and Benedict Cumberbatch, 48 years old. Gisele Bündchen, 44 years old, and Tom Brady, 47 years old. Victoria Beckham, 51 years old, and David Beckham, 50 years old. Rita Wilson, 68 years old, and Tom Hanks, 69 years old. Blake Lively, 37 years old, and Ryan Reynolds, 48 years old. Gwyneth Paltrow, 52 years old, and Brad Falchuk, 54 years old. Talia, 53 years old, and Tommy Mottola, 76 years old. Mariska Hargitay, 61 years old, and Peter Hermann, 57 years old. Goldie Hawn, 79 years old, and Kurt Russell, 74 years old. Hilaria Baldwin, 41 years old, and Alec Baldwin, 67 years old. Erica Riker, 55 years old, and Randy Jackson, 63 years old. Nancy Carell, 58 years old, and Steve Carell, 62 years old. Sofia Vergara, 52 years old, and Joe Manganiello, 48 years old. Tina Fey, 55 years old, and Jeff Richmond, 64 years old. Kyla Weber, 46 years old, and Vince Vaughn, 55 years old. Eva Longoria, 50 years old, and Jose Bastin, 57 years old. Ciara, 39 years old, and Russell Wilson, 36 years old. Lauren Hashian, 40 years old, and Dwayne Johnson, 53 years old. Rita Ora, 34 years old, and Taika Waititi, 49 years old. Paige Butcher, 45 years old, and Eddie Murphy, 64 years old. Katherine Schwarzenegger, 35 years old, and Chris Pratt, 46 years old. Pink, 45 years old, and Carey Hart, 49 years old. Jessica Alba, 44 years old, and Cash Warren, 46 years old. Jennifer Lopez, 55 years old, and Ben Affleck, 52 years old. Kourtney Kardashian, 46 years old, and Travis Barker, 49 years old. Emily Blunt, 42 years old, and John Krasinski, 45 years old. Chrissy Teigen, 39 years old, and John Legend, 46 years old. Beyoncé, 43 years old, and Jay-Z, 55 years old. Catherine Zeta-Jones, 55 years old, and Michael Douglas, 80 years old. Kim Kardashian, 44 years old, and Kanye West, 48 years old. Alicia Vikander, 36 years old, and Michael Fassbender, 48 years old. Alicia Keys, 44 years old, and Swizz Beatz, 46 years old. Kristen Bell, 44 years old, and Dax Shepard, 50 years old. Robin Wright, 59 years old, and Clement Gerardot, 41 years old. Evan Rachel Wood, 37 years old, and Jamie Bell, 39 years old. Kirsten Dunst, 43 years old, and Jesse Plemons, 37 years old. Gwen Stefani, 55 years old, and Blake Shelton, 49 years old. Vivica Paulin, 56 years old, and Will Ferrell, 57 years old. Hailey Bieber, 28 years old, and Justin Bieber, 31 years old. Sandra Bullock, 60 years old, and Brian Randall passed away in 2023 at the age of 57. Zoe Saldana, 47 years old, and Marco Perigo, 46 years old. Shea Shariatsity, 36 years old, and John Cena, 48 years old. Reese Witherspoon, 49 years old, and Jim Toth, 54 years old. Zoe Kravitz, 36 years old, and Channing Tatum, 45 years old. Callista Flockhart, 60 years old, and Harrison Ford, 82 years old. Kelly Ripa, 54 years old, and Mark Consuelos, 54 years old. Deborah Lee Furness, 69 years old, and Hugh Jackman, 56 years old. Camila Alves, 42 years old, and Matthew Mikanagi, 55 years old. Mila Kunis, 41 years old, and Ashton Kutcher, 47 years old. Michelle Obama, 61 years old, and Barack Obama, 63 years old. Eva Mendes, 51 years old, and Ryan Gosling, 44 years old. Jada Pinkett Smith, 53 years old, and Will Smith, 56 years old. Kylie Jenner, 27 years old, and Travis Scott, 34 years old. Jessica Biel, 43 years old, and Justin Timberlake, 44 years old.